I don't have like a huge one
Who
or
cares?
anything. I'm only a couple months in. I just made a affiliate like I don't know, last month.
For
That's
those of you who aren't into the Super Bowl, this Sunday there's even a bigger event happening on
KDK's
Katie's
Marbles.
Twitch.
KDK, what's your Twitch name? Are we not allowed to say it?
You're fine. I'm just a VTuber over there, so it's rarely my actual face. I designed my own character and stuff like that. So
Get out of here.
That sounds like
so you don't want people knowing your real face that follow you there.
it's
we'll
one
leave
of those like I'm not looking to put it out there
Yeah.
and promo it in that way. I'm also some sort of like cyber goth looking individual, so it's not even. It's like a whole.
It's exactly what I'm seeing right now.
It's like playing a whole different kind of person. You know, you have a persona that you get together on there. But yeah,
That's
I
fun.
play marbles on stream. If you found me, you would probably know it was me.
Okay.
I'll put it that way.
So you're turning this into a little like scavenger hunt,
Yeah, sure.
a potential wild goose chase.
Are you
Good
playing
luck.
your actual personality right now, or is this a character?
This is just me. I exist. I'm much more of an announcer during
That's
marbles.
what your character would say.
That's
like,
exactly what Saw Sorrento would say to throw us off the loop. I'm excited to have you here, Katie, especially because you're coming for Matt, can we get this going in the group, by the way, if you're on Facebook? Especially because you have such a small part. Like you come in today for today, obviously. You come in for like one reading and then you're done. We're doing 3 chapters. So thank you. First off, thank you, Saw. I'm going to call you by Saw. Thank you for joining us today. If you're tuning in, what's up? Welcome. You probably noticed that this is a different setup. One, I didn't know you could do this. Look, it's what you're used to seeing with us. We're going to get a little bit more intimate today. You can also see that Evan is not with us today. We are not going to have anything being drawn today. It's his birthday. So if you get a chance, feel free to tag Evan Winston on Facebook. He loves the attention. Tell him happy birthday. And one thing you love about him, he's a big words of affirmation guy. Make sure you're telling him happy birthday. But today we have 3 of the voice actors for Behind the Shroud. We have our main character and lead, Pendelv the Parser, who will be played by Matthew Emery. We have our Beacon of Order, which is also a way of saying like the sheriff in town who keeps the order, Iron Fist and Iron Hand. Iron Fist with an iron glove around it. Beacon Saw Sorrento, who will be played by the wonderful KDK. And then our secondary character, the idiot of this story, the 10-foot-tall Jester, who used to be very good friends with the Beacon of Order, Joran the Jester, who will be played by me. So what we'd like to do with this is we're going to just start reading this book from start to finish. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3 today. This will probably not be a full hour. And then what we'll do is I will ask the author, Mr. Matt Emery, 2 questions between each chapter. And then if you have a question, if you're tuning in, if you have a question you'd like to ask as the chapter goes on, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll make sure to ask Matt. And if you're watching this on a replay on YouTube, you can still ask a question and we will ask it on our next Facebook Live. That pretty much sums it up, right, Matt?
That sums it up.
Here's the biggest question that I have, and we'll dive in. Okay, hold on. Yep. The biggest, and then Matt, you get ready to read the back cover to everybody. Katie, Saw. I'm gonna go by Saw for the rest of this. Will you be staying with us after the first chapter, or will you say, "Hey, my parts are done. I'm moving on"? It's totally up to you.
I will be here and muted, probably working on some background like graphic stuff, but still listening in because I love the story that much. I just want to listen to the rest of it.
We paid her for that. Well, I'll Venmo you that. Katie, in your when you say like you're like in the background working on your stuff, I know that we found you through Gold Mountain Games. Yeah. What is it that you do with them? You're obviously not just a voice actor for them. Are you also illustrator? Are you more of the storyteller? Like, what do you do with them?
My official title is creative director. It's a very broad situation. I do a little bit of sound editing, a little bit of video editing, a little bit of graphic editing, a little bit of layout editing, a little bit of admin stuff, and then whatever else I have going on in the background that's not GMG related also. So
Nice. Very, very cool. I want to change my name to that.
Well,
Creative
thanks for
director.
taking your time out of your busy day to join us here.
Appreciate
not a
it.
problem. It's fun.
That being said, then let's dive right in to the story. Matt, if you want to kick it off,
Sure.
reading the back cover, and if you are tuning in, if you have your book, if you're bringing the kids, now would be the time to open. Well, don't open the book yet. Go to the back cover so Matt can read the story we're about to tell with Behind the Shroud.
Perfect. As winter thaws into spring, something sinister keeps the sleepy town of Lucidus in chills. 10 lives have been claimed by a mysterious killer, and whispers point to a figure once adored, an eccentric jester rumored to have retreated into madness. Summoned to investigate is Pendelv the Parser, a detective with 3 beasts and a sharp mind. As he unravels the puzzle, he finds more than he bargained for. An old feud reignited, a shadowy foe lurking in the fog-drenched riverlands, and a deadly game where every move might be his last. In the midst of peril, an unlikely bond begins, offering a dark insight and perhaps a key to the killer's next move.
I love it. I love it. This is actually one of the questions I asked, but I'd love to ask it before we dive in. First off, if you're joining us, we just got a spike in viewers. Welcome. What's up? We're going to be reading Behind the Shroud from start to finish. And today it's just the first 3 chapters. So feel free to read along with us as we play our characters. Matt is the author of this. Matt, you did a mystery novel.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first mystery in all of Unfound Adventures. As an author, what inspired you to write a mystery?
It's a story that I love. I think mysteries are some of the best and most fun stories. Plus, you don't see that many fantasy detectives. I mean, there's a handful. You have the Dresden Files. You have Geralt of Rivia. I was also watching The Witcher through when deciding how to cleanse my palate from Harbinger, and this was the obvious choice.
I love it, dude. We're going to talk about Blake Snyder's 10 genres and what I feel this would fall under. Have you ever read Save the Cat, Saw? Save the Cat? No? All right, cool.
I don't think so.
I might learn y'all something today, which is something
Please.
I don't get a lot to do. Okay, that being said, Behind the Shroud, an Unfound Adventures original detective mystery. We're going to go from chapter 1, Making Camp. If you have questions as we read along, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll ask them at the end of the chapter. Pendelv the Parser, over to you. Oh,
Can I have an initial question?
Yeah.
Could you PM me a link to the most updated one? Because I had the unupdated one.
I got it.
And I don't want to misread your beautiful words.
Thank you, Katie. It's rather solemn. All right, here we go. Behind the Shroud, Chapter 1, Making Camp. Nobody saw the man enter Lucidus. He came by the light of the unblinking moon. He moved in stealth within a fog so dense that even the emblems patrolling the village did not detect his passage. Those keeping watch observed an unnatural fog, perfumed by hints of metal which moved counter to the gentle wind. They thought nothing of it. They merely straightened their coats and squinted their eyes. The experienced among them transferred their senses into their callings, their soulfully adjoined spirit beasts, which had anatomies better suited to surveillance. Even the keen eyes and trained ears of the most astute callings registered nothing out of place. Had he been less overworked, a young, zealous emblem named Candor might have noticed, if not his pangolin beast Nipper. Alas, even Candor did not possess the gumption to raise suspicions over mist. Absent any harm done, they were content to let it pass. It did. The fog came, the fog went, and Pendelv the Parser walked within it. He pondered his reasons for veiling his entry as he walked. Too many investigations had been twisted by word of his arrival. The Parser's involvement signaled things had become dire. The news changed people. They became tiresome. They started acting out their guilt. Best case, that meant straightening up, changing their habits. Worst, trying to be helpful. By his estimations, it was better to avoid all that. Arrive unannounced. The more secrecy, the better, he had learned. Pendelv had never officially accepted the beacon's invitation by letter. No one, not even the water beacon herself, knew he was coming, by design. Every village in these parts had an order enforcer who wore the Eldweiser's emblem like it granted them impunity. Find a town with the least amount of order and look for an agent of chaos. If not in a Zigra, the parser's second stop would be with the emblems themselves. As far as he was concerned, nobody was innocent until they proved themselves to be, especially in this neck of the Jungian woods. There was a saying that described Lucidus and the other settlements at the foot of the organism. Ruckus follows rainbows. In these parts, superstition ran rampant. They believed the deity spoke to them in signs and symbols. A rainbow meant luck, the perfect time to attempt to outwit one's betters. The Lorens splashing over the bulkheads and edifice before the first colors of fluorescence meant a season of prosperity. On the contrary, long winter was a bad omen. The smell of sulfur in the air meant fertility, the optimum time to try for a baby, and finally, an emblem on one's chest denoted authority and sound judgment. Naturally, the parser, a man of science, recognized that increased output from the sulfuric fumaroles was a sign of one thing, and one thing only: volcanic activity. Still, most absurd of all was the notion that an insignia on one's chest made one ordained by the deity to dispense order by any means they saw fit. Though Pendelv had yet to meet an Eldweiser, if deductions could be made by their respective Pandit families, color him unimpressed. Still, out of habit, he cautioned himself against hasty verdicts. This was a real town. Lucidus was not another backwater. Pendelv had actually heard of it, not that he ever expected to be summoned there. Lucidus was a neighboring town to the Water Temple, the seat of the Beacon of Order herself, a woman touting a high double-digit force of emblems across the waterlands. Pendelv's presence suggested a failure that most leaders would shy away from, hence a second reason for veiling his arrival: professional courtesy. He arrived at Beacon Saw Sorrento's estate without issue. Pendelv released the set of his jaw, and at once the air began to clear. The clingy static relaxed, the fog dissipated, and the natural night emerged. Chugach, the man's canine beast, lowered its antlered head and snorted. "Well done, Chew. You'll be safe here," he told his beast. "I only have one small order of business, and I won't need light for it. You can relax." He would not have to tell his calling twice. Voltaics, the version of auric control that Chugach possessed and the means by which it created fog, took a lot out of the beast. "Smitha," the parser said, turning to a second calling, arboreal in form. Peeling itself off from the woods, this beast was a dead ringer for one of the leggy beech trees that grew in abundance on the Beacon's estate. Smitha and the trees possessed the same smooth, clean, gray, unblemished bark. "This'll be camp," he said, indicating a clearing around the side of the Beacon's manor. He sighed. So this was Lucidus. Now that he arrived, he allowed himself a moment to anticipate his case. Only a week ago, he received the Water Beacon of Order's letter. It had been short, tense, informative, and ominous. It read,
Pendelv the Parser, your services are needed in the Waterlands. The bad omen of a long winter is promptly fulfilled. The frozen ground resists our graves, and yet we have been forced to dig many, of all sizes. After weeks of investigating, we still have more questions than answers. The few answers we do have are as follows. No pilots have been killed. The victims cannot be linked by industry or alliance. Happenstance alone unites them, the wrong road taken at the wrong time. They're killed by poison. The smell of it lingers on them. I fear a prolonged lack of resolution will unseat the order on which our society relies. Should you hold any regard for the Water Pandit, your Eldweiser requires your assistance. WBO.
Pendelv patted the folded letter in his breast pocket. "And Luke," the parser said, addressing a third beast. A camouflaged crocodilian beast revealed itself riding within Smitha's branches. Mute gray scales morphed into vibrant green and yellow, with hints of scarlet within the folds. "Your free ride is over. I need your eyes. Go to the quarry and the millworks outside of town. Look for anything that you deem suspicious. I will be with you every step of the way." Soundlessly, Luke dropped to the ground and vanished into the night. Smitha's mastery was internal creation, which manifested as the ability to rapidly generate the trappings of trees in any shape, be that wood, leaf, root, flower, or fruit, though the last did not appeal to Pendelv's lavish tastes. On the top of the parser's minds were the comforts of home, which we had learned how to emulate while traveling. Over time, man and beast iterated a hammock design that rivaled the most sumptuous sleeping arrangements. Smitha went to work on it now, burrowing its lanky legs into the soft earth. Pendelv insisted the calling take measures to avoid attention by anyone with aura sight. When creating, so he'd been told, the tree beast's roots would glow with surges of aura. The parser, though revered for his powers of deduction, was unable to see aura. Such was forever a thorn in his side. Chugach, now relieved of duty, the location of camp established, curled up against Smith's trunk. The beast stationed itself in a guardian's position. The parser knew that despite a night spent with one eye open, his wolf calling would be attentive in the morning. Pendelv completed his last order of business in a thicket of bushes. On his way back, he removed a cord of ivy tangled in Chugach's antlers. Once in his leafy bed, he transferred the bulk of his visual senses into Luke. Nothing better than staking out a crime scene while simultaneously horizontal.
And that's end of first chapter. Pendelv the Parser showing off his callings on his arm. I love it, man. I want to do because some people came in mid-chapter. So I'm going to kind of recap some of the things that I'm hearing and then ask you a couple of questions. And if anyone's here, it's like you're reading and you're like, I have questions here. You can feel free to ask. Matt does not have to answer. We're going to talk about why at the end of next chapter. But here's some of the biggest things that I took away. We have a mysterious man coming into this town through this fog that maybe he caused himself. We don't fully know, but you hear this, that unclench the jaw. He has what's called callings. When we hear of three of them, there's this wolf elk, there's this tree. We know you showed it off. And then there's this like caiman beast that he has. They kind of walk with him, each having their own powers, right? Voltaics we heard creation, we heard camouflage. And then it's the town he's going to has this water beacon of order. It's a very superstitious town is what it seems like, which I would love, by the way. But this main character we have is it's the opposite. He's very analytical, very logical, like very like to the T. So he's coming into a town that is not the same as him. And he's looking like it could either be this Azigra that people are talking about, or even the people of the town itself that consider themselves higher ups. And then he's here, it sounds like, from Water Beacon of Order, Miss Saw, because there's been a string of murders. That's been the biggest thing that I'm taking. That's a lot. That's the biggest things I'm taking away from first chapter. Would you agree, Matt?
Saw agrees. Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Yeah. Well summarized.
There are some questions that we just won't answer, right? We don't know how to answer it yet for everybody here. Shout out Casey.
Yeah, it's crazy because he has a son or he has a daughter, excuse me. So that was probably a huge surprise.
Here's kind of the question I have at a high end. Someone that wants to be a writer. In your opinion, Matt, what do you think it is? What goes into a first chapter?
Yeah,
in your own mind.
I mean, the storytelling device in essence is setting the scene. And there's a lot that's themed off of Hound of the Baskervilles. Hound of the Baskerville, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes mystery that was like the most read, most highest selling Sherlock Holmes story of all time. And even if you go and you look at Hound of the Baskervilles book description right now, you'll see similar structure in how it was laid out, because that story is so good and it's so eerie. And so I wanted to bring you into a world that, it's not super described. We'll get a little bit more into the description of the town, but set a scene where things are just a little bit dark and, things are happening in the shadows.
Yeah, so you set up literally that mystery. You want to go into it being like, ooh, it's kind of creepy. It's kind of eerie. And then what is it? Because we see our main character in the first chapter. What is it that you wanted to get across of like his personality or who he is?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I was looking for a good word that felt like a fantasy detective. The parser is what I landed on. And I wanted that to be a sort of a flavor of the character. You really don't see him too much. You see him just operating on his own in a means that has probably become strategic. He talks about, I may have used to do things differently, but now I do things this way because this is the best way to really be objective on a case and to have people operate the way they would normally operate. They can't even see that I'm here, otherwise things change. So you kind of get a sense of his operation. I guess the last thing, and this is hard to portray in a single chapter because you don't have that much opportunity for characterization, but as interesting as a detective is, like as interesting as, say, Sherlock Holmes is or Geralt is, just the fact that they're a detective is not interesting on its own. So I think you really want to showcase features of a character that would make them interesting outside of the fact that they like to pick up on clues. So hopefully that comes through throughout the course of the story.
Super interesting, man. It's by the way, Jody came in. She said, "Don't have to answer that. That's more for Casey's question, not for the question that I just asked." But what I'm getting from Penn Delve is like, it's this guy that's already thinking 2 steps ahead of anybody else, and we're going to see more of that as the book goes on. And it does kind of come back to, if you see me look over here, it's like I wrote all of them out. Blake Snyder, who's this famous screenwriter, and he's a big teacher of how to screenwrite, talks about the fact that in his mind, there's only 10 genres of story. And he said the reason for it, and they're not fantasy or sci-fi or anything, he calls them things like Monster in the House, Golden Fleece, Out of the Bottle, Dude with a Problem, Why Done It's, things like that. He says each of these stories touch something deep in our human experience that we feel like we can relate to. And we'll get into it more as the chapters go on. But the one that comes to mind when I think of this, he says most mysteries are like this. It's called the why done it rather than the who done it. It's why done it. And what it tends to feature is, number one, a detective who doesn't really change him or herself. It's like what you see is what you get with this character. So you get a detective. You're going to get a secret, which is alluring. It's like this alluring secret, and it's primal. And then you get a dark turn, right? It's not the detective that changes. We change as we read it. And we're like, what is it that we think? We're just following this guy or this lady in this story. So I'm excited to see how that plays out with this story.
I love it. It's interesting.
Okay. So also, Katie, great job, by the way. I mean, you only had a small part with Saw. What is it that you want to, when you hear about her, what is it that you want to embody with this character, to put you on the spot?
Just some of her inner monologue kind of gives away the large chip on her shoulder in dealing with anything. So she feels that she has to be absolutely perfect or she's not worthy of her position. She's one of those rare kind of paladin types that actually commits themselves to the thing, even if maybe it's getting a little to the means justify the ends towards this part of the story when things are starting out.
Spot on. Code woman.
Truly.
We're gonna see her more in the weeks to come. But for anyone curious, we're actually done with Saw. It's gonna be mostly Penn Delve and Joran for these next 2 chapters. It's all it's gonna be. But Saw has chosen to stay. She's gonna work on some things in the background. But we asked her before we came on, we're like, do you want to stay after this first chapter? She's like, I just like the story. So she's going to stay to be kind of a front row listener. And
love the support.
We love the support as well. Next chapter 2.
All right.
Lucidus
Chapter
Level.
2.
And if you have any questions, make sure to drop the questions in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the chapter. All right, I'm done.
Sweet. Chapter 2. Lucidus Leveled. Luke saw the world differently. Blue, bright. Even at midnight, the thin crescent moon provided the reptilian beast light enough to move in silent vaults. The calling, vanished by camouflage, slinked between stone buildings like a living shadow. It climbed up onto slate rooftops to avoid patrolling emblems and leapt, fanning out its patagium wings to glide across wide avenues. Quickly, but without urgency, it made its way down the hill toward the charging river that served as the town's southern border. Lucidus sprawled out along several thoroughfares that wound through forested hills. While not a wealthy place, it flirted with the well-to-do, being one town upriver from the substantial city of Edifice. The magnates of lumber, stone, and shipping had taken notice a decade ago of both the area's beauty and its untapped resources. They poured beast power into its development, though without foresight of days where residents would expand into the thousands. It sprawled out in 4 distinct districts, characterized by politics or industry: downtown, the quarries, the lumber yard, and the wharf. As each grew, these quarters meshed in both collaborative and stubborn ways. Luke paused, perched on top of a gallows in the center of the plaza, to give Pendel the layout of downtown. Most Lucidicians lived here, in pine and limestone houses built in concentric squares. At midnight, many hours after curfew, the town lay still. A few ships bobbed in the wharf, which looked to be an old quarry flooded. Here and there, roving emblems and their beasts marched out their patrol. The gallows, as the town's centerpiece, spoke volumes about the mentality of the locals. In many places, order was earned with goodwill toward one's fellows, with charity, generosity, and forbearance. In Last Grove, the city seat of the air beacon of history, a gallows would stick out like a dewclaw. Pendelv had never been to Last Grove, nor did he expect an invitation, for lack of crime to investigate. The parser felt a twist of irony. In the shadow of Saw Sorrento's estate, the water beacon of order herself, her namesake was wrought out of fear and violence. But again, Pendelv relinquished hasty judgment. Lucidus was not Last Grove. This populous town was on the cusp of the Jungian forest, downwind from the organism, and a hub of industry. Being so near the heart of the growing world necessitated different rules. To hear Beacon Sorrento tell it, as a town grew, the wildness about it rears up into a force that needs to be broken, like one breaks a stallion. For the moment, however, Lucidus slept calmly. The moment passed. In the distance, Luke heard a rumble. Thunder without lightning. The ground shook. The gallows rattled, the hanging rope lurching to life like a sleepy serpent. An emblem standing guard beside the pavilion stiffened, his avian beast startled into a spasm of flight. The earth shuddered once more, closer. 2 booms this time. The first one came by the wind. The second rippled through the ground. It fully woke the rope, jostling the loosely tied end from its cleat, freeing the noose to fall heavily on the wooden platform. The emblem looked at the gallows, then at Luke, then through Luke, searching the darkness for movement the calling would not make. The reptilian beast knew all too well that the human eye, and beast by extension, scoured for movement. Stillness and concealment were the closest of friends. Diversion helped too. A third boom, closer still, spooked the emblem over a crucial threshold. He and his calling took flight. They went in 2 directions. His beast flew toward the commotion, while man fled toward higher ground. He crossed the plaza, paused nervously in the center, and then shuffled awkwardly up a side street. A Zigra, Pendelv cautioned inside Luke's mind. On the other side of town, Luke caught a glimpse of midnight ink. A scratch of black against light blue moving into town. Surely a place the size of Lucidus had a warning system, yet no alarm sounded. Between thunderous booms lay a backdrop of silence, until the ground shook, bringing a chorus of crumbling brick, shattering glass, and a series of smashing pops as slate shingles slid one by one off a tilted roof. And now shouting. Luke retreated to the roof of a nearby 2-story courthouse. From a higher vantage point, behind the roof balustrade, it kept watch. The rampaging intruder moved fast, but not too fast for Pendelv's calling to recognize its shape. It bore no resemblance to any Zigra Pendelv had ever seen. This thing had hooves, black fur streaked with orange, and patchwork carapace. As Luke watched the creature, every glimpse raised certainty that this was no Zigra. This was a calling, an advanced calling at that, with a command of battle-tested art control. It utilized its mastery by orbiting its armor in a parade of pieces to the front of its bulk in order to cushion impact after impact. Houses fell into rubble in its wake. It appeared to select its stone victims at random, leveling one while leaving the next unscathed, or charging headlong, rocks first, straight through a row of walls, emerging on the other side in a fit of madness and feral fury. Pendelv raised his mind within Luke. Is this calling deranged? Get a closer look. The deranged calling, it appeared conclusive, swung its armor stones in an arc. A shop exploded in a cloud of debris, momentarily veiling the beast. Odd. Had the flailed stones struck the building, or had something else? Luke did not think it had lost sight of the arching stones, yet destruction erupted from a place out in front of their trajectory. I'm sorry. Keep your distance, Pendelv counseled. I know an aura blast when I... The words "see it" went unsaid, partly because Pendelv could not see aura, mainly because the beast frenzy had moved into the plaza. It had merged out of the dust cloud in a fiendish charge, bucking, kicking, battling empty air with its long hooked horns. Luke pressed itself to the roof's warm slate. The beast, now in plain sight, stood as tall as a portcullis and was built as solid. The armor stones had returned to its body, at least 9 of them. Each was aura fastened to its shoulders, breast, chest, back, hindquarters, and oddly to the sides of the beast's face, covering its eyes. The eye stones had holes bored through the center. If those did not limit its vision enough, shaggy hair draped over the peepholes. It did not seem to mind, or notice, nor did it notice the gallows in its path. They collapsed like a child's teepee as it ran the contraption over. Then, with what seemed to be a special vendetta, they were trampled underfoot, reduced to splinters in the blink of an eye. The mad beast stamped its hoofed feet, slammed its armored stones into the ground, repeatedly pummeling it into sawdust and toothpicks. Abruptly, the calling's attention flicked toward the courthouse. Armor stones became attentive, rising like sentries aside the deranged totem's head. They hovered there, a line of them at head level. They pivoted as one, as if tracking something. At once, they shivered. A pulsating recoil shook the stones. Then chaos. Aura blasts. Get out! The facade of the courthouse caved in like punch teeth. The roof lurched. Luke leapt upward, seeking new shelter. Pendel's beast spread its scarlet patagium, caught air, and rode it to the peak of a pavilion within the adjacent marketplace. Not a moment too soon. The courthouse collapsed in on itself, pluming the plaza in debris. Luke used the cover to retreat. It fled across the pavilion, slicing accidental holes in the canvas as it scrabbled for purchase. Another late, and the beast sailed to the wharf, which connected the market to the Lauren River. Close behind, the mad calling wreaked havoc, leveling pavilions, distributing incalculable damage. Luke climbed up on a boathouse. It did its best to stay ahead of the carnage, though the parser's calling seemed to draw it. Every place it fled, destruction followed. The boathouse was no exception. No sooner had Luke landed before the ground shook, then the roof wobbled, and then solidity evaporated from beneath its feet. The building fell in on itself, sinking the unsuspecting skiff that docked therein. Below, the deranged beast thrashed about, its armor stones indistinguishable from the boathouse, now rubble, which bathed in white water. The collapse took Luke by surprise. It fanned its wings to avoid falling into the churning blender. Any number of ill fates awaited the great lizard below. The deranged calling's horns, its armor stones, a battering hoof, an aura blast, or a simpler fate, being drowned by the crushing weight of a building on its back. Many hours spent climbing and flying paid off. Instinct took over. Instead of falling into the scourge, it caught a draft, sailing no great distance, but far enough to sink a talon into the dock. By might alone, it dragged the lower half of its body out of the water, away from the perils issued by the mad bovine hound. Get out of there. Luke had seen enough, yet as it fled, it chanced a final look back. The mad beast submerged, dragging a whirling pool of wreckage behind it. Something more, a sound, a sizzle, like a hot poker plunged in water. Then a peculiar shift in the coloration of the water, a sudden blooming of oily orange, a stench like death, like sulfur and burning hair. It assaulted the senses. Is it dead? When horns reappeared, Luke took his cue. Quickly, relishing life, it bounded back in the direction of camp.
Scene. Nice. Caved in like punched teeth. Great descriptor.
Ouch. Yeah.
Great descriptor. Okay, so I took some notes of what's going on. I'm gonna kind of do a quick recap in layman's terms and non-beautiful terms. And then I have a couple questions. And if you were just with us in that chapter and you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Here's what I'm noticing. In this chapter, we're actually in this parser, Pendel's calling's mind, in a sense. So we're not with the parser. We're with his calling, and he's kind of. Yeah. We get it. You're showing it off. As you can tell, this is how nerdy we get with our stuff. This calling, whose name is Luke, goes to this downtown to kind of parole the area, and then this thunder arises. There's these booms in the distance. And at first, they have this thought that it's this Azigra, right? This like shadowy figure. But what we really start to realize is it's a calling. So it's another beast. It's armored. It's deranged. It starts leveling everything in this town. There's stones attached to it. It looks kind of like a dog and a cow. and Luke is caught in the crossfire. So Luke's trying to get out of there, and this calling lunges into the water, almost taking Luke with it. And then, Luke's like, Pendelv tells Luke to get out of there. And as Luke looks back, we see that the calling is not dead. It just went into the water. Would that be kind of a gist?
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm pretty freaking good at this.
Nailed it. You are.
So what is it that you're trying to show the audience or the reader in this chapter, would you say?
Yeah, I was pretty straightforward in the beginning of my book, both trying to go from setting the scene straight into an incident that would propel us into the story, that would send us into the plot, something interesting that grounds you. And so that's what that is, the inciting incident. It's something that now Luke has witnessed, now that the town has experienced, that changes the case, changes everything, speeds everything up.
Yeah, it's like a bunch going on. Here's my favorite question to ask when someone starts reading a book to an author. Why is it, in your opinion, okay for someone to be reading and ask themselves, what the hell is going on in the first couple of chapters of a book? I feel like it's one of the reasons people put books down. They're like, well, I just don't know what's going on. Why is that okay?
Yeah. Well, there's only ever two states of being that you can be in. You can be in a state of definition, or you can be in a state of discovery, and you can't be in both at the same time. You kind of pick one. And if people want to be in a state of definition, that's fine. It makes them feel safe, makes them feel smart, makes them feel like they know things. That's cool. To look around and be like, there's nothing that is a mystery in my life. I don't know. That sounds really boring. I prefer the state of discovery, which is really what fantasy is all about, and where you have to pass through and maybe spend a lot of time in a fantasy novel. Let's ask a bunch of questions. And throughout the course of the story, if I proposed 20 questions within the first couple of chapters, we're going to systematically answer all those questions. I promise. Like, I'm not going to ask a question in a story that does not get fulfilled later. I won't do that to you. Mm-hmm. Trust.
Mm-hmm. Trust the author. They published it for a reason. It's okay we call them open loops in writing, right? It's like, it's okay for there to be an open loop. It'll close later. Any questions? Feel free. I'm going to take a quick pause. I do have good reading comprehension skills. Thank you very much. Not great reading skills, which we're about to find out in this next chapter as I become the character that will be reading. I try to keep an accent both as a narrator and as my character, and we'll see how that holds up. I will probably be in a state of discovery as I go through this. Matt, I've read this like 3 times. I'm still nervous. I'm going to mess it up because some of the words that you use in here. Malaise. Who the hell knows what malaise means? So for those that were here and left, how dare you? Because you're about to miss a really good Johnny Depp impersonation as we go into chapter 3. If someone, come on. I messed this up, this line that you're going to hear in here. I messed this line up 8 times. When I was reading it the first time and recording it. Sucked. All right. So I'm going to move y'all over here for me, and I'm going to move this here. Matt, anything to say before we go into chapter 3?
Yeah, what I'd love to do for you, if you're open to this, and I can shut this down if you're not, is
throw me a curveball right before I'm supposed to read.
No, it's not a curveball. It's supposed to be helpful. Well, will you have us in your screen, or you're going to be focused entirely in your screen on the script?
As of right now, I am looking. You're over here, and I'm looking at the script right in front of me. Would you like me to change it?
Cancel. Nope, you're good. You're good. You can leave that.
You sure?
Here's my one small piece of direction. Jordan's voice is an interesting voice, and it's a tough voice to maintain its enthusiasm throughout the entire chapter. What I'm going to ask you to do is try to maintain it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you give me a little bit more direction there, director?
You actually?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So the beginning of a chapter, we're really going to hear Joran come out. Mm-hmm. The beginning of a paragraph. When you have like a long paragraph, it's easy for Joranness to fade slightly until the end of that paragraph. And then we get a new paragraph and Joran's refreshed. What if Jorn could be maintained at sort of a stable equilibrium throughout the whole paragraph?
Okay. All right. I'm going to do my best, and you can rate me at the end of this chapter. How about that?
Sure.
And anybody in the chat, feel free to rate me at the end of the chapter. This is the longest chapter, too, which I don't like, that I have to do this. I'd rather just be dialogue and other people's. That being said, town just got leveled. A dog cow got away, and we're going into chapter 3. Chapter 3, The Jester. Adder returned to the island at dawn. A few of Eunice's desired intention trinkets remained, but others had been torn away, evidenced by patches of missing fur. The bovine hound stunk, a tormenting scent that embedded itself inside Joran's nostrils and never left. At best, it dimmed. But now the putrid contamination was refreshed. It roused a wild man from slumber, and he blinked grouchily, rubbing his eyes of sleep and stench. "Oh, my head is spinning," he groaned. "Or is that the world?" He took a deep breath, pressing his back firmly into the tree that he sat against. Once the spinning sensation settled, he cocked a wild eye at Adder. "How was remodeling?" he asked, his bone-soaked calling. "At least tell me you enjoyed yourself, no?" He chuckled. "Get some rest. See how you feel in the morning." "Whoa, would you look at that? It is the morning. How did you sleep? You didn't? Me either. How about you, Eunice? Your tails are looking extra bushy." He flattened his burst of flame-colored hair while inspecting his kitsune beast, an 8-tailed, fox-like raccoon totem of the same color. Eunice, his second calling, was wide awake, looking like it had a naughty plan, rubbing its paws together as if preparing for mischief. And is in another world. Look, Joran said to no one in particular, inspecting his third beast. Laid curled up within the shade of its broad parasol-shaped head, its plume of purple, blue, and green tail feathers tucked under its chin. "Hasn't moved in ages. Best sleep of a beast's life." Adder snorted unhappily. "I feel you, Adder. Look at all that comfort. Personally, I feel someone hit me in the head with a brick wall. Several, in fact." Begrudgingly, he rose to his feet, leaving behind an imprint of his oversized self in a nest of pine needles. "Good news, though. I've been through worse. Why don't you rest while Eunice and I make some preparations? No, please, don't come. Rest. Bathe. Roll in some dirt. I don't know. Whatever you do, just stay. Over there. I need a minute to think without being nasally assaulted. We need a plan. In case you weren't aware, we acquired a few adversaries overnight. We don't have much time before they come knocking." The morning expressed the hallmarks of springtime. Chirping birds, bright green spruce tips, a slightly soggy detritus. A river engorged. As the weather warmed, the Lauren River drank deep of the melting snow. The current was vengeful, single-minded, and raging. Here, man and beast bore witness to the culmination, the point at which the river became uncontainable. Their camp was an island a short trek west of Lucidus, where the river forked. One raging surge became 2 winding tracks around Limestone Bluff, isolating a forest karst in the river's center. This long, squat, and slender karst was the first of many. Just before Lucidus, the 2 tracks reconvened, restoring the Lauren in its astounding glory for a short stretch before reaching the bounteous karst fields. There, the mighty waterway splintered into 1,000 small washes that eventually drained into the infant sea. Joran chose this spot for 2 reasons. First, because from the sky, had spotted wild morels growing in troves beneath tulip poplars. Joran's lifestyle necessitated awareness of wild sustenance. Morels were a delicacy, along with tangos, pine nuts, crumberries, and pawpaw. However, as it was still early spring, most of his favorites had yet to come into season. This made the prospect of gorging himself on mushrooms reason enough to settle. Secondly, the island lessened the chance of being ambushed by his enemy. The only safe access was by air. While his knowledge of the of the nemesis was limited, he did know a couple of things. It could not fly, nor could it tolerate water. Adder had taken down 3 of them, each time by submerging it into the river. About its aquatic vulnerability, Joran could only speculate. He was far from an expert on such matters. For as little as he knew about his own world, he knew even less about the shadowy plane in which the creatures lived. The Shroud, his name for it, could only be glimpsed through the hagstone Adder affixed to his eyes. The eerie realm maintained little resemblance to the landscape with which the jester, all people for that matter, were familiar. Though his hideout could be easily accessible by any pilot calling, Joran was unconcerned. He could deal with people. His thoughts dwelled far from his human adversaries. Even that morning, in the wake of the destruction that Adder had leveled upon Lucidus, aware that the beacon and her angry mob would soon be on the hunt, they barely crossed his mind. Not that it didn't trouble him. He simply had more pressing matters. Joran and Vunis strolled to a secluded shallows littered with small stones. The fluffy red 8-tailed kitsune beast dug itself a hole and began rummaging in the dirt. As it did, it flicked its tail happily, stirring the air. The gangly man scoured for stones while working on a theory. His expansive mind could more easily focus when divided into 2 parts. One part would fixate on his favorite activity, rock hounding, while the other, larger part remaining could explore memories, concoct ideas, and formulate theories. Thinking back, each of his encounters with a Shroud Hound had one thing in common: anguish. If his theory held, strong emotions diffused themselves across the layered realms. Certain emotions appealed to the hounds more than others. By chance, Joran encountered the first Shroud Hound relishing in the misery of a dying innkeeper, a woman named Hikari. The parasite transferred over to her after draining a guest. However, Joran intervened. Adder became the new host, relieved her pain, and Vunis transmitted a healing intention into an amulet. Over the next few weeks, Joran became intimately familiar with the Shroud Hounds, nearly dying in the process. Each time, the arrival of the parasites could be traced back to an anguishing event. Once he knew where to look, he found a multitude of hounds lurking on the banks of Lake Prism. They feasted on the malaise of the many ignorant animals poisoned by the caustic alkaline brine. The mineral-rich hot springs around the organisms were deadly to the ignorant. One step into the wrong pool meant slow petrification, or if one was lucky, quick dissolution. The relative safety of the Jungian forest, a breeding ground for all manner of life, butted up against one of the most perilous landscapes Joran knew. The abundance of innocent youth and their proximity to the deadly hazard made the organism a hotbed for hound activity. Assuming Joran's anguish theory held true, he threw away a handful of stones. None of them seemed up to snuff. Nearby, Vunis had its 8 tails sunken into the muck. By channeling auric energy out of the living riverbed, the calling could materialize minerals out of thin air. External creation was the official name of this primary mastery. Unlike most callings, Vunis had awakened a second mastery. The second was auric transmission, for which Vunis allowed the for Venus allowed the beast to infuse objects with palpable intentions. When it used its two masteries in conjunction, objects could be rendered from the unseen with powerful effects. Joran called the mastery desired intention. Most practically, the red beast used them in support of its fellows, such as tying them to Adder's fur or Joran's beard after infusing them with bravery or eloquence. Yet their utility extended itself into amusement from time to time. While not Joran's most refined idea, he once embedded a stone with the intention of sneezing. He snuck the stone into a boat and then went about its day. That evening, when the boats returned to port, he was reminded of his prank when an exhausted, disheveled fisherman rowed home empty-handed in a chorus of achoo's. The right stone and the right intention. This was the errand Joran tried to concentrate on, though his attention was scattered. Try as he might, the jester could not distance his mind from the nagging question. How can I defeat the hounds in mass without dying horribly? Here's one. No, false alarm. One with a hole. A hagstone. Bound to be here somewhere. Venus, are you looking? What are you doing? Venus's eyes were pinched close. Its tail drew auric potential out of the ground, concentrating the ethereal energy into a cradle of gossamer light. The beast worked its hands with practiced efficiency, as though knitting, threading cords around and about themselves with purpose. Making something, Joran concluded. Not me. I like to find them. My near pathological need to discover. I don't expect you to understand. That's more thing, isn't it? Something caught Joran's attention a couple of steps away. He raced for it and fell to his knees. Before the lapping tide could wash in and obscure the object, he grabbed it. Porous, black, forged in the volcanic heart of the organism, and then ejected violently into the world, where it eventually fell into the jester's possession. He had not thought to look for such a treasure. A pyroclast. Now he just needed to crack it open. Venus! It's the longest chapter.
Nice. You nailed it. Yeah, and Joran doesn't really read in like a cadence that's like quite rapid. You belabor it, and I think it does the character justice.
Thank you. Do you want to recap this chapter, or do you want me to?
Yeah. So I think what this chapter does is it changes what kind of story we're telling. What kind of mystery. It's not so much a whodunit, and I know Blake Snyder calls it the why done it. It becomes more of a question: can justice be done? Because not everything is what it seems. And I think this becomes apparent in the next couple of chapters as we start seeing the Beacon step in and be like, not only is this guy a suspect, Joran, a suspect for the murders, but he's destroyed half the town. They're like sure that he's a bad guy. And so this chapter is also to show a person is not their reputation. The jester is not his reputation. There's more to the story. You meet his beasts. He's a complex individual as well. He's got 3 beasts, which is like exceedingly uncommon. I think there's maybe, Pendle mentions at one point, there's like a dozen people in the entire continent that he knows that has 2, and fewer than that have 3. So this is like a special individual. We also see some clues as like what is even being investigated here. And we see some clues to these dark, shadowy foes. Like, what are we up against? Mm-hmm. So there's like some hints of stakes. And there's also like if you'd never read anything else that was in the Unfound universe where people have callings, you might not know some of the construction of that universe. Like I share senses with my calling, and my calling is here in my life to encourage me in certain ways. Just like, yeah, I guess you can't see my husky back here, but huskies are super active. They always want to go for walks. They always want to be outside. You cannot live with a happy husky and not spend a lot of time outside. Callings are the same way. Where Joran's like, I have this pathological need to discover. Meanwhile, Venus is over here making something while Joran's like rooting around in the rocks and the shallows. Because you don't know this now, but like is a beast that Joran has spent most of his life with. And so it's like deeply rooted in the pathology of the character that he needs to discover things because of that relationship with. So clues to this, like I don't expect you to pick up on all of that.
But I think the cool part is like what we want callings to represent for people that find themselves in our world is a part of yourself, like a path you have walked, right? Kaiti has myth, which would probably be the exact opposite of a husky. 17-year-old cat probably allows you to rest and gives you introspection. No? Well, I've been wrong before. But it's like we all have these paths and parts of ourselves that we like lean back into. And the thing I like about callings and what Matt, all of us have really created is unlike this personality test that's like you're an ISTJ and that's who you are as a person. Paths are like, no, or callings are like, this is what you represented for this time of your life. This is the path that you walked at this time. And it stays with you, right? I think breaking down this chapter and then we'll kind of wind up. I thought it wouldn't take an hour. And of course I was wrong. It's like we get to see the lovable idiot that we've like already thought was the bad guy. So it's like it's like you hear the defendant's case in this chapter. And it's like, okay, if this was a courtroom, whose side are we starting to take? Are we fully believing what we see from someone that's a jester who's clearly up to mischief at times? Or does he have some innocence about him? I think it's really, really cool. I know this is the last question that I'll ask Matt, and then we'll kind of sign off here.
Yeah.
If anyone has questions, feel free to drop them. I really commend you of like writing a character and then having someone take them over. Right. It's like a director. It's like, and then that actor is going to be that character, no matter how much that you have it in mind of who that character is. What did you initially see in Joran? Because I clearly took it my own way, right? Like I gave my Johnny Depp impression with him and everything. But before the Johnny Depp impression came in, what is it that you saw in this character when creating him?
Yeah, I mean, you layered something onto Joran that was congruent but expansive. And so when I pictured him, when I was writing him, I went for zany. And I imagined, what am I like when I spend multiple days by myself in a place, even just like the moment I get into a place where nobody is within earshot, especially now having my son and just like babbling back and forth to this other creature who can't speak my language. It just like brings out a zany attribute in somebody. And so he's talking to trees, he's talking to his beast, they're not talking back, and he's constantly talking. And so what is that character who's constantly talking that's a little zany? What's his inner dialogue? Because it's just constantly going. And it's inspired by, somebody I know.
Yeah, it did help that it was inspired by me in the beginning. But the version of me that you see, right? No, this was awesome. First off, thank you so much, Saw Sorrento, for joining us. Even for that small part, we are going to see more of Saw in the weeks to come. Thank you very much, Matt, for coming today. Thank you very much for everyone that watched this, whether live or on the replay. Like, if you have questions as we read through this, feel free to read through this with your kids, with yourself. Allow this to be your audiobook, except we're having fun with you and drinking a beer, if you didn't know. And ask questions. Feel free to put questions in the comments. We'll answer them the next time we come. I'd like to keep this weekly if possible, Matt. I don't know where we're at with that.
Yeah.
So that being said, we'll see you next week where we learn a little bit more about the first victims of these Shroud Hounds. We do a flashback with Joran. We get brand new characters coming in, and we get into a bit of a log jam. That would be kind of what sums up next week. Right?
Nice. All right. Sounds good.
Perfect.
Looking forward to it.
Everybody, we appreciate you coming. Thank you so much, Saw. Thank you so much, Pendelv. Thank you so much, Joran. And we will see you next week. Boom.